Hello, welcome to my little trip down road testing memory lane. Q&A video for you this week. There's been a lot going on. I've been on my travels. I've been on the launch of the Husqvarna Vitpillen 801, which is basically a KTM Duke 790 in disguise. We did that in the south of France, which was really nice. And it's a great bike, so you can read all about that in MCN soon. And it's on the website now. Typical with anything relating to KTM, you see loads and loads of comments talking about the cams and all the rest of it. And KTM have at last addressed that problem with their goodwill scheme, where they're going to, any camshafts that are affected, they're going to deal with the repairs or replacement or whatever, whether the bike's been serviced or not, whether it's under warranty or not. You can read a story about that in MCN. But what I would say is, I think KTM have got a long way to go before they reassure people. I mean, they're obviously doing something now, but the big wide world doesn't know that they're doing stuff. So, yeah, I think they're obviously creating a lot of new models, a lot of new exciting stuff coming up. But I still think they've got a long way to go before really people can really trust them, and you stop seeing comments like that. I mean, how do you think they should address it? How do you think they should tell the world? I mean, should they do like a big advertising campaign, you know, almost making light of it like some companies would? Who knows? Thanks also for all your nice comments about the what makes this bike great on Paul Lang's Monster last week. What a bike, what a guy. And hopefully I'll be doing another video with a bike with him soon, on a bike that's so typical Paul Lang. It's unbelievable. I mean, this bike and him go together like apple pie and custard. Also, I mean, there's lots of bad news out there with dealerships and stuff like that closing, which is a real shame for all the people involved. But there's lots of good news from EICMA, the yearly International Motorcycle Show, which is in Milan. Loads and loads of new models being unveiled. Looks like it's going to be a busy launch season for me, which is really good. Lots of exciting stuff. I've written a few down. What we got here? The Tuono and the RSV4. I mean, they're going to be brilliant. They're two of my favourite bikes anyway. You've got all the new BMWs, new S1000RR, new S1000R, new M1000R, new M1000RR. Suzuki RMZ4, that looks pretty interesting. The V2 Panigale and the V2 Street Fighter with their new V-twin or L-twin, depending on what they want to call it at that particular time. And I suppose the star of the show is something that's coming out of nowhere, which is Honda's V3 prototype. So they're showing this new engine in a really cool tubular aluminium frame with a single-sided swing arm, upside-down forks. It's got an electric compressor, kind of electric turbo or supercharger on it as well. So there's a few things there. Number one, it's exciting. I mean, Honda's triples, I mean, they go back to the 80s with the NS500 two-strokes that they used to race in GPs that Spencer won a championship on. The NS400 road bike. They know how to make odd Vs work really well. I mean, look at the Honda V5. That was just dominant, wasn't it, at the beginning of MotoGP. So it's exciting times. First of all, you know, it seemed as if we were kind of resigned to a life of parallel twins. So it's really encouraging and exciting that Honda have got a different engine, which is brilliant. It's probably not going to be cheap. The whole reason parallel twins exist in the first place is because of their cost. You know, with a V engine, you've got two more of everything. You've got lots of top end. You've got lots of rocker covers. You've got all that stuff that you don't get on a parallel twin. So I can't imagine it's going to be cheap, but be interesting. Be interested to see what size it is, whether it be a big bike or not. And we're all crossing our fingers that this engine goes in something exciting. I mean, Honda, quite a few years ago, they did a prototype of a V4 engine in sort of like this kind of weird kind of spider's web eggshell kind of bike thing. but it ended up in the VFR 1200. So I just really hope they make something quite quirky. And if, I don't know, one of the interesting things is if it's like a middleweight, we'll come on to those later, and you've got things like Panigale V2s, you've got the R9, which we'll come on to in a bit as well, the KTM RC990, bikes like that, you know, they're going to be the new norm. And it's almost as if we've kind of reset, you know, as these bikes are, you know, super bikes and super nakeds have got to a point now where they almost, when you look at like all these new middleweights coming along, the big ones almost seem like dinosaurs. You know, the first thing you think when you see an S1000RR with massive wings is, where are you ever going to ride that? And okay, go on a track, am I going to be good enough to even ride that? So these bikes are becoming more expensive, really powerful, and less relevant to normal people. So it's like we reset back to the 90s or early noughties, where bikes kind of had 120, 130 horsepower, except this time round they've got all the electronics as well. So I think it's a good time for biking. And if track days go down the route of letting in 120 bhp middleweight sports bikes, just in that group, not being muddled by thousands, you know, I think a lot of people would buy more sports bikes if you could go to a track and just muck about with other people on similar bikes. So I'm quite excited. I mean, I don't think big bikes are bad really, but I think that smaller bikes are better for more fun riding. So, you know, a Sunday morning blast on a B road or track riding, I think the smaller, more manageable bikes give you a lot more pleasure. But I think there's still room for big bikes when it comes to touring, you know, and wanting to cover distance. If you've got like a big Multistrada or a Tiger or GS, you know, a nice big engine with lots of torque just makes it absolutely effortless to ride. You know, especially when you've got lots of luggage and two up, it's just easy. And, you know, a smaller tourer or a smaller adventure bike, they're good and they're fun because they're more involving, but they're generally not as physically big. They're generally not as effortless because you've got to change gear more. So I think it's quite exciting times for biking. So what else? MotoGP the other weekend, Bagnaia and Martin absolutely duking it out at Sepang, you know, despite all they've got at stake. And we saw that, where was it, Thailand, when they were doing the same in the wet. I mean, these guys are just phenomenal on the speed they're going. So next weekend is the title decider in Barcelona now because of the really terrible events that happen in Valencia. So yeah, who do you think is going to win? Be interesting. What else have we got? I think that's about it. I think we should crack on with some questions, shouldn't we? Right, first one is from Mark Swinnen, 9100. Do you think an R9 can follow your GSX-R750 on track? Really interesting question. I mean, you know, I've ridden MT-09s, I've ridden an XSR 900 GP on the road and on the track. To be honest, didn't really excite me that much. I felt a little bit dull power-wise when you've got a real kind of open expanse of racetrack or fast roads. You know, the R9, I mean the XSR 900 and the MT-09 are much better at low speeds because the engine's got a lot of grunt, a lot of character, lots of punch out the corners. It gets a little bit lost at high speed. But in terms of the R9, that's an interesting one because it's got the same engine, so you kind of know what you're going to expect, maybe. But the chassis is a lot sharper. So, you know, around a track, it's going to be able to carry a lot more corner speed, be a lot easier to turn, a lot easier to ride. It's interesting, really, because the kind of power it's got, is it 117 bhp, something like that? At the rear wheel, you're probably looking at around about 110, maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more. And that was the kind of power that Naughty's 600s had. So it's not going to be slow by any stretch. I mean, can the R9 keep up with the GSX-R750 on track? Well, number one, does it have to? Because in the UK, at least, you can't buy a GSX-R750 anymore. The nearest comparison I've got is we've done quite a few group tests where we had a GSX-R750 versus a Daytona 675R. So the R9 and the Daytona aren't a million miles apart. The Yamaha's got more power and more grunt, but it was really close between the Triumph and Suzuki. I mean, you're talking probably within a second of each other, because although both bikes do different things at different parts on the track, the GSX-R is kind of longer revving. It's easier to ride fast. You've got to change gear more on bike with fewer cylinders. I mean, you really see that when you ride twins versus fours. But I think the R9 is going to be very easy to ride. So I think in terms of can the Yamaha keep up with the Suzuki? I think in pure lap times on, in a time trial, I don't think there'll be much in it. I think if you actually raced each other, I think the Suzuki would have the legs. Be interesting though, wouldn't it? I mean, what do you think? I think this year's going to be really interesting with regards to these middleweight sports bikes. So what we got, the RC 990, Panigale V2, R9. I think it's going to be mouthwatering, really. I'm really looking forward to riding them, more so than the thousands, because you just know that you can boss one of these bikes. You can probably ride it to its limit, and you've got no chance of riding a super bike to the limit. As Pecco Bagnaia and his mates prove every year at the Ducati Race of Champions, and they're riding their road-going Panigales within a few seconds of Superbike and MotoGP times. So those bikes, like I said before, are completely, out of our league, really. And this bunch of bikes, the R9 and the KTM and all the rest of it, I think it's going to be fantastic. I mean, no doubt my GSX-R750 will probably be called into action at some point next year as some kind of comparison, whether it's on the road or the track. I think the R9 is going to probably be a little bit more refined just because it's a lot newer. If you think my GSX-R750, it was last updated in 2011. Mine's a 2014 model. That was kind of almost the same bike as it's been for a decade. So really, my bike was probably designed 20 odd years ago, and the R9 is pretty new. So I think the R9 will be easier to ride. It'll probably be probably have slightly better suspension out of the box, probably slightly better brakes out of the box. You've got the electronics, so it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to do the launch. It will answer a load of questions, and I think it's a mouth-watering proposition when all these middleweight sports bikes come out. So yeah, fantastic. Thanks very much for your question. Next is from Frantic with some numbers in there. Thanks very much for your question. I've returned to riding after a 15-year break, and I like the electronic aids of bikes from the past 10 years. They're so much safer for anyone unused to big power. Yep. A quick question I have. Middleweight used to refer to bikes in the 500 to 750cc range, but these days 950s and bigger are still called middleweights. Where's the line drawn now, and why did it change? Yeah, good question. I mean, middleweights for me has always been a bit of a misnomer, because middleweights are always the bikes that were they used to just be assigned to nakeds. Maybe 20 years ago when I started at MCN, we'd only really call middleweights nakeds, and they were generally the half sporty nakeds compared to the sort of a lot sportier ones. And you're right, they'd be around about 600 odd cc, and they weren't the best spec. They didn't have all the bells and whistles. Because of that, they're actually quite heavy, and they were heavier than their sportier cousins. So they weren't ever actually middleweights. I suppose you could call them mid-capacity, but even that now, isn't true, because they've grown and grown and grown. I mean, the simple answer is all down to emissions. All the manufacturers have had to stuff more and more Euro corks up their exhaust pipes to adhere to all the regulations, that without making the engines bigger, the power would have dropped and dropped and dropped. So to keep the same amount of power, they've had to make all these bikes bigger, which is why they've all grown. Whether it's a middleweight or a super naked. I mean, my KTM Super Duke that I've had this year is a 1390, and that's only that big because of emissions. So I guess middleweight is still quite a handy kind of catch-all for the middle of the road bikes in any category, you know, whether it's adventure bikes, you know, KTM 890 Adventures, or if it's nakeds like the MT-09, or if it's sports bikes like the Panigale V2, they're all lumped in with the middleweight tag. But yeah, that's why. And then sort of the lightweight, I suppose you'd call them, even though the physical weight aren't very light, would be the A2 license bikes. So you've kind of got those 47 bhp 400s, and then there's a big jump, actually, isn't there, to middleweights, and then you've got the big bikes, the super bikes, and the big adventures and all the rest of it. There's not much middle ground really, and these middleweights can all be A2 restricted, but we've done tests at MCM before where we found that, you know, if you really do restrict the bikes, obviously there are some people that might forget to do that, you're lumbered with a heavy bike with not much power. So, you know, I think if you're learning, it's always better to get a proper A2 bike. You'll have a lot more fun with it. But yeah, that in a nutshell is why middleweights have grown and why middleweights were never really middleweights in the first place. But thanks for your question. Next one's from Jonathan Mackey, 4884. I have a question or two I hope you'll get around to answering sometime. Here we go. I watch all of them anyway, so I'll know. Well, thanks very much. I'm of the carb era and know nothing of these modern ECU injector setups. People mention flashing the ECU and setting the engine management up on a dyno to release the restrictions placed on bikes by manufacturers. Can you explain the reality of this, please, and does it invalidate the warranty? I'm a big fat bloke. Could be Lamb Chop's body double for the movie. No offence, Chopsy. Well, I think Lamb Chops is quite a svelte young gentleman, actually. I got an SX1000 last year. I guess that's the Ninja 1000 SX, is that? Or a Z1000 SX? And really enjoy it, but recognise the suspension is just not suited to me. I've cranked the rear preload to about max and got the sag on the forks about right, and it's better, but wondered if you could tell me the process for getting an upgraded system installed. Do I take the bike somewhere and they sort it? Am I expected to strip the bike, send parts and specs, and then they will redo or replace my kit and I have to refit? I hope these aren't dumb questions. Well, not at all. Well, the first one, you know, goes back to my point about all the Euro restrictions and all the rest of it. So manufacturers kind of manipulate the power curves and the power deliveries of their bikes to be able to pass these regulations. So, for example, if the Euro probe went up a bike's exhaust at 7,000 revs, then you'd have to make sure that at 7,000 revs your bike's running quite lean. Or if their noise meter happens at 4,000 revs, they've got a little microphone next to the engine, you want to make sure your bike's nice and rich because that kind of dulls the sound. So as a result of that, you've got kind of power deliveries that aren't as clean as they could be. So, you know, with a lean bike, you've got quite snatchy throttle. Quite often with fuel injected bikes, standard bikes anyway, when you come completely off the throttle, there's no fuel dribbling into the cylinders for emissions. So that's why when you crack the throttle again, the fuel has to kind of recirculate and then off you go. Whereas in a proper engine, you still have a little bit of fuel going into the cylinders, and when you pick the throttle up, it's a lot smoother. And the same goes with the noise regs. If it's a little bit rich somewhere in the revs, leaning it off will make the bike run a lot better. So, you know, even with a completely standard bike, if you were to take it in to be remapped or set up on a dyno, even with all the standard exhausts and everything, you'll get a much cleaner power delivery. You'll probably get more power, you'll get richer power, and you'll probably get better MPG as well. So that's win, 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 win. In terms of suspension, we've spoken about this before. There's only a certain amount you can do with standard suspension. But the most important thing with racing suspension, for example, the number one thing to do is to set your spring rates, and that's to choose the correct spring for your weight, the way you ride, the conditions you're riding in, whether it's wet or dry, the kind of grip you've got. So when you're sort of that far into racing, you're changing springs all the time to suit the condition. And it's really, really important. After that, the preload and the damping is almost the icing on the cake, because the spring's the most important thing. I think someone's done a video of me kind of saying that that's not right, and they prove that they've set their bike up with the standard settings to improve it, but there's just no way. You could never ever race on a bike with standard springs and just adjust preload and damping. You can make it a little bit better, but fundamentally you need to change springs. So if you are outside of kind of the range where the manufacturer thinks pitches the weight, I mean, I guess they would assume that most riders are sort of between 75 and 90 kilos, maybe something like that, a manufacturer, maybe outside that. But you know, a lot of people are outside that realm, so changing springs will absolutely make a massive difference to your bike. You know, especially something like an SX, you know, you just make it so much sportier. Put proper springs in it, proper tyres, proper brakes, and it'll be amazing. And we never get to ride bikes like that. Only every now and then you'll get to ride a bike with proper suspension in it. It's mind-blowing. It's absolutely amazing. In terms of how you do it, you know, I suppose the quite friendly suspension companies in the UK, there's K-Tech, there's Maxton, places like that who could give you advice. I guess for people like that, it's going to be easier if you send your suspension to them. If you take your rear shock out, or if you take your forks out, tell them how much you weigh, what you're going to do with the bike, and they'll change the springs. Or you can get your forks, new cartridge kit in your forks, which they might be able to do in situ, and a racing rear shock, or kind of an aftermarket rear shock, which is kind of easy to do in situ. But yeah, it's probably good to contact these companies and see what they would do. You know, they would prefer just to work on your suspension without a bike attached to it, or just send you the parts. Yeah, but it's worth looking into, and you know, that's probably the one biggest thing you can do to any motorcycle to improve it immensely, absolutely off the scale. You know, my race bike started as a standard road bike, which is brilliant. You put suspension on that, you're 5-6 seconds a lap faster, easy, no question. You know, and you get to ride, we've ridden super stock bikes, which are supposed to be really standard, and they feel completely different to their corresponding road bike. So yeah, let me know how you get on anyway. But suspension, springs are the way to go. Right, next one is from Mangi Shumail. Mangis Humail, or Mangi Shumail. Anyway, thank you very much for your question. Really appreciate and enjoy the Q&A series. Thank you. I have a question for you, please. Can we shift down while going through a corner with and without a quick shifter? Case being where through a corner you realise you're in a higher gear. Thanks in advance. Yeah, interesting question. I mean, obviously all your gear changes need to be done before you enter the corner. You know, kind of within the braking zone. I'd say not after that. So in that kind of however many seconds it takes you to brake into the corner before you let go of the brakes, that's when all your gear shifts should be done. Sometimes though, a corner will creep up on you on the road and you're not prepared for it, and you'll be in too high a gear, or if you kind of outbrake yourself a little bit on the track, and the brakes aren't enough and you do need to come back a couple of gears, yeah, you can do it. You need to make sure that the bike is as upright as you can when you do it, because if you upset the bike with the gears with a lot of lean, then you know it could cause you to crash. I would definitely, if I was going to do that in emergency, use a down change with a clutch. I think a quick shift, an auto blipper in those situations would be too harsh. It would upset the bike too much. So you know, if you find yourself into a corner a little bit too fast, you know, try and get down some gears with the clutch, definitely. The other thing with a quick shifter, unless you're really positive with it, you know, because you're not doing, you might not have shut the throttle fully, you're not fully concentrating on what's going on, it might not work, and then you'll be in a whole world of trouble. So yeah, shift down in emergency. Make sure your bike is as upright as possible when you do it, and use the clutch, and hopefully get down into the proper gear to slow you down. But ideally do all your shifting first. And thanks very much for your question. Next one, Paul Fowler, 665. It's a longie. Great video as always. I'm 52 and like you started riding on an AR80 at 16 and then had an RD125, an RG125 and a TZR125. Lucky boy. Before passing my test and getting the TZR250, even luckier. Then an FZR600, lucky. Several GSX-R600s before buying an R1. Living the dream. I no longer ride full-on sports bikes, but love working my way up through the different size bikes. I think people that don't really miss out. Also, I toured on my R1 and again on my Fireblade, which I bought after. Both bikes were from the mid-2000s. It wasn't easy, but doable. There's no way I'd want to tour on any of the current 1000cc sports bikes, with the possible exception of the BMW S1000RR. I also have a question. So yeah, you can tour on sports bikes now, but they're a bit more extreme, and I think we're all a lot older and less flexible and a lot less willing to do it. I also have a question after watching your brilliant long-term review of the 1390 Super Duke. I was wondering who pays for everything on loan bikes and what happens to it all when the bike goes back. For example, the luggage you fitted to the KTM or an aftermarket exhaust, even stuff like tyres. Is it that MCN or do you get tyres free from the companies that make them so you can review them? It would be interesting to know all how it works. Well, yeah, that is interesting, isn't it? I mean, you see us swanning around. We get it all the time, swanning around on free bikes with free kit and blah, 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 blah. And that's kind of all true. I mean, no magazine would exist, no YouTube channel would exist if all your content was paid for. If you had to, you have to pay for your bike, pay for your tyres, pay for your fuel. It's just not sustainable. So what happens is with the long-term bikes is that the long-term test bike is loaned to us from a manufacturer, generally from about kind of, I suppose, April or May till September, October, for that period of time. The fuel is paid for by the magazines, by MCN, you know, and it's all part of the budget that's created to produce content. You know, fuel is used to create content, so that's covered by the magazines. And then we're encouraged to test products, test riding kit, all of which goes to our product reviews. So that starts with tyres. So it's really good for me anyway to keep a handle on what all the new tyres are like. So with the KTM, I went through 5 different sets of tyres, just because, not because I needed them, but because I wanted to know what they're like. So when people ask me tyre questions, which they do all the time, I can say. And they're provided by the tyre companies, and that comes out of their marketing budget or their advertising budget, something like that. So fuel and tyres are covered. Things like luggage, again, you know, if I fancied some luggage from a particular company, I would contact that company and ask if they'd like us to test the luggage. So again, that comes out of their marketing budget. They send it to me. I test the stuff long term. So with the KTM, I had some SW Motec stuff, which is absolutely brilliant. And I use that for thousands and thousands and thousands of miles. So I've got a good idea of what that's like. That is that appears in the long-term test reports. That appears in our product reviews on MCN. And you can actually buy the products through the website as well. And then those products always belong to the manufacturers. So, you know, we send them back. Unless they're worn out, they don't want them back. So generally we send stuff back. And then when it comes to riding kit as well, or crash helmets or whatever, it's the same thing. The manufacturers send us these things to test, comes out of their marketing or advertising budget, and we produce product reviews off the back of them. And again, we'll send the stuff back if it's not too worn out. If it's not, we keep hold of it. A lot of MCN staff collate all their riding kit and we give it to the air ambulance. So yeah, it's all kind of, it's all there to create content, all these bikes, tires and products and all the rest of it. You know, on the face of it, you know, even I would have thought the same. You know, you just think there's this individual that's just been given stuff and he kind of lives in this Willy Wonka world, but that's not really the case. It's all used to create content. But yeah, I hope that answers your question. And finally is from Paul 899cc. So you'd be a middleweight. Question, Mr. Neves, love the channel by the way, thanks very much. With the ever increasing cc, power, weight and cost of adventure bikes, coupled with the current biking generation getting to a certain age, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the new Tiger 800 Sport. Could this be the new GSX-R750 of the sport touring adventure market? Quick, light, comfortable, sensible money and not too powerful, much as per the GSX-R750 K3 to 07 era, hence the comparison. Cheers, Paul. Well, yeah, thanks for your question. That's a bike I missed off at the beginning. That Tiger 800 hasn't been a massive fanfare about it because it looks pretty similar to the 660, but I think you're right. I'll reserve full judgment until we actually ride it, but I think it's going to be great. You know, I think that a lot of manufacturers are missing a trick. You know, I don't mind riding adventure bikes. They're nice and comfortable, but there's so many, and all the marketing and all the videos that go with them are all these people riding adventure bikes off road. I mean, in the UK anyway, when do you see that? That's about as relevant as a Panigale going around Mugello. I suppose that's the dream that they're selling. The reality is you're just going to ride these bikes on the road. And adventure bikes are fine, but they're kind of hampered by the fact they've got knobbly tyres and big front wheels. I mean, they still handle pretty well. I mean, a Multistrada V4 still handles beautifully. Metzeler now are doing sports tyres for 19-inch wheels, so you know they don't hinder you that much. But you know, what about a bike like an S1000XR or something like that? That is a pure road bike with an upright riding position. That's kind of the dream for me and many riders. But the thousands, as we said before, they're almost sort of too much. And you know, an 800 or a 750, that is the sweet spot when it comes to power on the road, at least. And I think that Tiger 800 is going to be brilliant. It's going to have a fantastic engine. That 3-cylinder engine is brilliant. Triumphs always handle. It's going to come on 17-inch wheels, so you'll be able to have a good choice of tyres. You could put something really sticky on it if you wanted to. But the best thing for me is the fact that the 660 Sport is probably one of my favourite all-rounders. It's fantastic. It's got a, you know, it punches well above its weight. For a little 660, you probably don't think it could put a skin off a rice pudding, but it's got more than enough power. It's got 90 odd bhp. I've forgotten how much the 800's got, but it's probably 115, 120, something like that. But even the 660 has got more than enough oomph. I did 1,000 miles in a week on it for a feature for MCN, including riding in that massive storm we had a few Februaries ago. And it's brilliant. It's comfortable, light, great engine sound, nice handling, good brakes. It was just tick, 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 tick. And then this 800 would just have a little bit more of everything. Hopefully it'll have a few more toys. Hopefully it'll have cruise control. That's what it was sadly lacking. But if it's got cruise control and if it's got heated grips and it's got that little bit more grunt, I think it would be fantastic. I mean, you've got to go a long way before anything is an equivalent of a GSX-R 750. But yeah, I get your point. It could be the 750 of the tall rounder world, couldn't it? And maybe good enough to unseat the Tracer 9, which is kind of in terms of value for money, the Tracer 9 GT Plus is absolutely amazing. It's got an amazing engine. It's got the noisiest screen in the world, which is why I could never own one. That's the problem with most adventure bikes, unfortunately. We'll have to see what the Tigers is like. But yeah, I think that could be a dark horse, if a Tiger could ever be a dark horse. That could be potentially one of the bikes of next year, I think. That and the R9. I mean, what are you guys excited about for 2025? I would say those two bikes really for me are the ones I'm looking forward to riding the most. But yeah, be interested to see what it's like. So that is it. Thanks very much for bearing with me. Next week we've got another What Makes This Bike Great, and you might not like it, but give it a watch anyway. Bear with me. It's a bike I really love. So yeah, stay tuned for that next week. And thanks very much for watching.